IVM.
$100. That's all it takes to begin your journey with Bitcoin and Ethereum. No, really. With CoinSwitch, you can start investing in over 100 cryptocurrencies with just 100 rupees. On top of that, there are zero charges for deposits and withdrawals, so you can trade, buy, sell, however and whenever you want. All of this, plus their extremely intuitive interface, makes CoinSwitch the perfect app for beginners in the crypto space. But don't take my word for it. Just download CoinSwitch for free and try it out for yourself. If you'd like more information on cryptocurrencies, tune into a show about crypto with me, Rohan Joshi, my new adventure on IVM podcasts. CoinSwitch, kuch to badlega.
Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Siddharth Bhatia. The Jallianwala Bagh Massacre is a story every Indian knows. On April 13, 1919, a crowd that had gathered at the Jallianwala Bagh in Amritsar to protest against the arrest of Dr. Saifuddin Kitchlu was fired upon by soldiers led by Brigadier General REH Dyer. As the crowd tried to exit from this one solitary path open that day, hundreds of people were killed, and the estimates now are said to be anywhere close to between 390 people, that's 400 people, to more than 1,000. Over 1,200 people were injured. The Bagh since then has become a memorial, a very simple one to replicate what the situation was on that particular day, with bullet holes very much visible, and the narrow exit still looks the same, giving visitors a chilling idea of what it must have been like to be trapped in. Now the central government, in its wisdom, has redesigned the path with friezes of all kinds of Punjab scenes, including Baisakhi celebrations. And this has drawn widespread condemnation. One comment against it came from KBS Sidhu, a retired IAS officer, who commented on Twitter, "I'm literally heartbroken. Having served as Deputy Commissioner Amritsar from 1992 to 1996, I really understand what emotions the old entrance conveyed." I mean, his 4 years there must, and of course that he is from Punjab, must have really given him special insights into understanding not just the sentiment, but the importance of Jallianwala Bagh. Mr. Sidhu retired as the Chief Secretary of the Government of Punjab after 37 years of service, as recently as July 2021. He joins us as a guest on this podcast today. Welcome to the Wire Talks, Sidhu Sahab.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's begin with what you said in your tweet. Your tweet conveyed your personal feelings on the alteration of Jallianwala Bagh entrance and exit, but what exactly is the objection apart from the sentiment of the whole?
Basically, let me first of all start with the caveat that I have not physically visited the renovated memorial, but the photographs which I saw before and after, more particularly, were pertaining to the narrow entrance and what that narrow entrance has now become. Now, what it transpires is that the only narrow entrance which was preserved and which effectively was open on that day was barely 5 or 6 feet wide, paved with the Nanak Shahi bricks. So much so that even the machine guns which General Dyer had gotten were unable to get through. Now, irrespective of whatever might have been done inside by way of conservation, preservation, renovation, now what people saw was an entrance, and immediately the emotion that you got was that of somber, of sadness, of melancholy, that this is literally the only entrance. And then, of course, you got a huge open space, 5 to 6 acres, and you would get into a feeling or emotion of, great amount of grief. Now, it's so transpires, and that is what I think the designers have tried to put it in, is a kind of a sequential type of portrayal of the events. So exactly in that entrance, they've made, it appears that the people are coming out, which the designers subsequently have seen on the internet. I repeat, which the designers appear to be saying on the internet, is that this was a feeling of general rejoicement on the occasion of Baisakhi being the 30th, I beg your pardon, I repeat, 13th of April, 1919. So now what really happens and what it triggers an emotion to me is that a person who's now going to enter from that place, or where you traditionally used to enter, where you used to have a feeling of melancholy and grief, now you see a crowd which apparently is coming out and they seem to be in a happy mood. So the very entrance and the very admittance to that memorial starts off and triggers feelings which are totally contrary to what this memorial is all about. So that really, I couldn't believe, and I put in that tweet that these are not fake pictures. But irrespective of whatever might have been done inside, that narrow exit is now paved with murals, or you can say statues of people who seem to be celebrating the festival of Baisakhi, whereas that is the entrance, and that has traditionally been the entrance. I don't even know whether this is going to remain the entrance, but if it is the entrance to the memorial, then definitely it starts on a very wrong note and a very strong, I beg your pardon, very wrong footing, and does not convey the emotions which this memorial or any other light and sound program or the museums are expected to convey.
Yeah, and I think more is coming from what I gather, but we don't know because this is not a government that's transparent, as you know. Now, this was your personal reaction. How has Amritsar seen this? Because this is embedded in every Amritsari's heart. It's embedded in every Punjabi's heart. How has the Amritsari seen it? How have Punjabis in the state seen it? What is there? And has there been a lot of commentary in the local media? Has there been a lot of talk if you have spoken to anybody? What is the sense and the mood you're getting?
I think the sense and the mood, I have talked to a large number of people, local people, serving people, youngsters, people belonging to the Shiromani Gurudwara Prabandhak Committee, serving civil servants, business people who have been, wedded literally to Amritsar. And they say that this is at best incongruous. I mean, it does not really gel with what this memorial is all about. For the people of Amritsar, this was a monument dedicated to a point of inflection in the freedom struggle. It started, as you pointed out, with the arrest of two non-violent Gandhians, Dr. Saifuddin Kitchlu and Dr. Satya Pal. And there was a general hartal, as you, in a wider context, you would appreciate that the World War I had ended. India was expecting a better deal from the British, I beg your pardon, from the British Empire. But that was not forthcoming. Rather, you had the draconian Rowlatt Act and so on. So Mahatma Gandhi was already on the scene. So on this particular fateful day, people were protesting, and in narrow entrance, you had something anywhere between 10 to 20,000 people. Now, for people of Amritsar, this is an essential pilgrimage. It is right on the way to the Holy Golden Temple or Darbar Sahib. And more importantly, I've tried to do some research. While I was in Amritsar as a deputy commissioner, I tried to get those figures. So whether the death toll is 390 or 1,000, the general talk is that Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, virtually in equal proportions, were massacred on that day. So if there is anything symbolic of the joint effort of the Indian community in trying to uproot the British Empire, it was the Jallianwala Bagh. And therefore, it is a very sad and a somber type of atmosphere when you used to enter right from the hustle bustle of the city, a couple of yards inside, there would be a total kind of a silence. You could hear a solitary bird, and it was a bare and spare. So that flame was there, the well which has been preserved, that was there, bullet marks and so on. But now it creates the impression of a museum, the entrance to which is, paved with people who seem to be happy. Now, any person, whether a localite or whether from outside of Amritsar who visits, does really know the background of the memorial. So what he's expecting is a sober and somber and a melancholic type of atmosphere. But what he's immediately greeted by is a mural or a series of statues at the very entrance, which was paved with Nanak Shahi bricks. So that kind of offends the sensibility and sensitivity. And that is what I think mainly people are agitated about. Everything else, it is nobody's case that the lawn should not be spruced. At the at the night better, illumination should not be there, let it be. And if there is a light and sound program, if bullets are being fired and people crying, no one really minds that ought to be there. But it is this single factor which people feel that this is not in sync with the sanctity of this memorial and what this memorial wanted to convey.
I have been there. You were recounting how it conveyed a sense of melancholy and grief. I visited there many, many years ago. The visit has stayed with me because the first reaction is that you're moved and you try and imagine. I didn't see the light and the sound show. That must have been even more striking. But you're moved by the bullet holes, by the presence of the well, knowing the story of how people must have jumped. And then you can imagine them trying to get out, people, finding they had no recourse, and the firing going on and on till the ammunition gets over. It has stayed with me after all these years. I remember those bricks very much. So this is really somewhat cheapening, but somewhat mocking of that sense of grief, because now it appears like, the atmosphere was perhaps a little jolly. Now, has there been commentary in the media saying this?
There are two aspects of it. Let us first of all clarify. One was the inaugural ceremony, which the Prime Minister virtually inaugurated. So there was a kind of virtual light and show program and music accompanying that. I only hope and pray that that was a kind of a one-off event, synchronizing with the inauguration, because that definitely was more in nature of a celebration rather than a somber commemoration. So let's hope that the people, the event management companies or whosoever was handling that made a hash of it. That's one mistake dead and gone. But the entrance itself, from where you got the feeling that this narrow entrance from where British soldiers or British Indian soldiers, whether they were the Gorkha regiment or etc., it's a matter of history, they went, and then there is an open space, there's a peaceful crowd, they're protesting, of course, but here are people, soldiers, and firing indiscriminately, and Hunter Commission, etc., reports, including the proceedings of the House of Commons, they very clearly say that Brigadier General, actually he was a colonel, he was only officiating as a Brigadier General, so he was constantly telling the soldiers to fire low, and there was a well, so people thought they had better chance of survival if you jump into the well. So coming back, and at cost of repetition, that entrance itself now is paved with happy people who seem to be coming out. Perhaps the artistic person was trying to tell a story that, people were going there in a jovial mood, and then sequentially go and, this is what happened. They're trying to tell a story. But that story is well known. What it immediately hits you is you enter Jallianwala Bagh and there is a happy crowd and happy chubby children coming out. That is not what the story was, or that is not what the story we ought to convey.
So why do you think this has been done?
I personally think, first of all, when we say it is, of course, a central government, but Jallianwala Bagh is governed by a trust which is created by an act of parliament way back in 1951. So even before the country had general elections, the parliament deemed it fit to have a trust which is set up, under an act of the parliament, headed by the prime minister himself in ex officio capacity. And of course, you had the president of the Indian National Congress, etc., ex officio members. That's another part of the story. A couple of years ago, they said, why Indian National Congress president? Let us put it as a leader of opposition. That's a separate matter. Understandable that with changing time, those type of amendments would have come. But for all intents and purposes, I think this job would have been delegated or consigned to the Department of Culture, Government of India, and they in turn would have hired experts, conservation experts, light and sound experts, architectural experts. It is supposed to be a multidisciplinary project, and those people, to my mind, did not sufficiently engage with either the local people or the local historians. And let us also be clear that because of the COVID environment, the Bagh in any day was closed. People never really knew that some type of renovation was going on. Recently, when I visited, I wanted to enter this, and nahi saab, ye band hai abhi. And it was pretty much in the old shape. And therefore, I think the people who actually were doing the design, etc., were totally delinked from the local sensibilities and the sensitivities. PowerPoint presentations being made in the ministries and virtual meeting taking place. So this would be the story. You start with this, you go there, and you come back, and this is so on and so forth. I mean, we've got the Khalsa Heritage Memorial in Anandpur Sahib, which talks about the Punjab during the pre-Sikh era. Then it comes to the Sikh gurus and the birth of the Khalsa and so on, ultimately partition, Punjabi Suba movement, and it also very sensitively captures the Blue Star, etc. So you tell a story sequentially, no controversies. You're presenting what is historical truth. Here, while you are presenting or trying to present a sequential unfolding of the events on that particular day, you actually turn the story upside down and convey not only a totally different picture, but also in a way that offends people's emotions and sensitivities and sensibilities. So somewhere there was a big gap. People were not being consulted. And I would like to think that the COVID lockdown only, I would repeat that, the COVID lockdown only contributed to that gulf, which would have been between the designers and the people who were ultimately accepting the design.
So as I was saying, that there is a design, larger design to refashion history according to what the new rulers say. Now, that by itself is acceptable and understandable. What is not is A, the lack of consulting people, B, the lack of reacting to their objections. In the case of Sabarmati Ashram, the local, and Ahmedabad is a huge architecture community, a huge historic community, historical, people who know their history. And also, Sabarmati Ashram conveys a sense of Gandhian past. So, this is virtually amounts to bulldozing. And, I don't think even if there was no COVID, that there would have been any. But that's my view. I don't know what you feel about it.
I think both the points that you made are very well taken. And in that sense, if there is any intention to rewrite the history or reinterpret the history, that would be a separate issue of discussion and debate. Here, no one is trying to rewrite history in one sense, that no one is trying to say that, this massacre was justified, or whether a particular community was responsible for it, or the sacrifices of one community were less and yet they're getting disproportionate benefit or publicity out of it. There is no such thing. I think it is something which is entirely insensitive and unpardonable, that here is a massacre which has taken place, and the very admittance or entrance to that should be a mural or a set of statues which conveys people in a happy and a jovial mood. So what are you doing? And that old building, if there is something, one structure which needed to be preserved absolutely in the same shape and form, was the entrance. I mean, people used to actually spread their arms and see that they say a lucky person is one who can touch both sides of the wall. And now I'm sure with those murals jutting out a couple of feet on either side, even a kid would be able to do it. So you could have, part of that gallery inside or wherever, and to show that this was what the people were doing. But for it to come with the statue of Shahid Udham Singh at the entrance, very good. He was a person who said to have avenged the massacre. And immediately you enter and you're going into a gallery, which the earlier people saw was a narrow street paved with those small bricks. So that offense, it is not a question of rewriting the history. It is trying to insult, I would say, the martyrs, and it shows a very poor understanding, to say the least, of the historical event and the type of sentiments. I repeat, the type of sentiments associated. This is one of those rare occasions when even Winston Churchill, as Secretary of the State on the House of Commons, has come out with very strong words. I may not be able to offend, quote, but and the British people, the Prime Minister, Queen Elizabeth has been there. When I was there, Betty Boothroyd was the Speaker of the House of Commons. They never formally apologized. At best, it was a regret. But with that background, you suddenly have a series of happy, jovial faces, and that is where you're entering into, as if it is a kind of a theme park. I mean, that is not what I want the Jallianwala Bagh National Memorial, governed by a trust which is headed by the Prime Minister in ex officio capacity, to convey at the entrance. Inside, whatever conservation has been done, etc., I think we need to do that, and full marks to them if they've done it. But it is the entrance and that alone which really relegates everything to the background.
What has the political reaction been, the Congress and the Akali Dal? But the Chief Minister, for example, has said it's not bad, it's nice. But what has been the general reaction of the Congress and the Akalis?
I think the general reaction, as far as the Chief Minister's clip was there, one has to see and place it in the context. The new governor was being sworn in, and at the exit, there was a kind of makeshift press conference, so to say. And of course, the Chief Minister would have, and he said that in his remarks, that I wished, the Chief Minister did say in those remarks that, I was a part of that virtual inauguration. And he said some words to it seems fine. So when he says seems fine, maybe he's talking overall in the context of the memorial as a whole. And he may not have personally visited, but I am sure if the Chief Minister were to be asked today in the context of the entrance, maybe his answer would explain things better. Of course, we all know the tweet of Mr. Rahul Gandhi, but generally, overall, I have not found even the hardcore, BJP supporters coming out specifically saying that this entrance is proper. Of course, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development has recently put a small 2-3 minute video saying this is what happened, this is what happened. And when I pick up this rationale of saying that this entrance, they start off with those people congregating to the Mela in a happy atmosphere. That is from this official video. That is what they wanted to convey. So politically, at least in Punjab, apart from that stray remark of the Chief Minister, which I think was in the context of the overall event of inauguration rather than the contentious issue of the narrow entrance, the people generally have condemned, to say the least, and at least no one has specifically in Punjab said that this is the best design or the more appropriate design or a better design for the entrance.
That includes the other parties also.
Yes, whatever other parties, local parties, I may not be able to quote some high-profile leaders, but overall people and the national newspapers after the first days of Blitzkrieg of the revamped memorial also have been seeing, generally are carrying news that this has offended the sensibilities of people of Punjab in general and Amritsar in particular.
I just read a Facebook post by well-known Punjabi, that is Neelam Mansingh, the theatre director, who has said that something very, very strong, similarly saying it affects, we saw it as a particular place and now we are made to completely relook at what that history was. So I'm sure that there must have been...
To put in the context, sorry to jut in, Neelam Mansingh's father and parents, and she grew up and I think was educated in Amritsar. Dr. Mansingh Narankari passed away, grand old man of Amritsar. So very reputed Amritsar family, of course, after her marriage, she settled in Chandigarh. And of course, as a daughter of Amritsar, that is the feeling of a sensitive artist,
Yeah.
I think.
And these are people who get a platform as well as a very articulate people. So she is perhaps speaking on behalf of several people who may not have come out so publicly because of whatever constraints. Okay, well, it is an optimistic hope because I don't think public reaction has other things, but we live in this. So the designers may have picked up just a few points from the overall history, and everyone knew that it was the Baisakhi, so they just hit upon that Baisakhi. But I hope that anything, and you also hope, obviously, that anything that has been, erroneously done should be eradicated, and the old structure with the bricks, which is an important aspect of the whole thing, be preserved. But my worry is that this kind of detachment may continue elsewhere. So you have a outside hope. I feel that may or may not happen. So let us see.
Just one thing I'd like to add, that when we talk in terms of Shaheed Udham Singh going to England and assassinating, whom he killed was the Michael Dyer, who was the Lieutenant Governor of Lahore, an ICS officer, who actually subsequently approved the action of General or Brigadier General Dyer, who actually ordered the shooting. So sometimes, since there are two Odyers, one is an Englishman and other an Irishman, sometimes in our history books, people are writing that Shaheed Udham Singh went to England and actually assassinated General Dyer. General Dyer died subsequently at a fairly young age, a natural death. And it was the ICS officer who was assassinated in, I think, 1940 in the Caxton Hall.
Okay, so I'll repeat it. Thank you very much, Sidhu Saab, for explaining in a very detailed way the context of how it has been seen and how we must see it and how that might get distorted. It's certainly better than, getting just a tweet of anger and outrage. And I hope every listener of this podcast gets to know that it is not as simple, but it is also something to do very strongly with the emotions of the people of Amritsar and, dare I say, India. So thank you once again. That was KBS Sidhu, retired civil servant who served in Amritsar for 4 years in the 90s, speaking about the redesign of the Jallianwala Bagh entrance and explaining its wider context. We will be back next week with another guest for the Wire Talks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You can check out this podcast and other interesting ones on the Wire website, the IVM podcast website, app, or wherever else that you get your podcasts. Goodbye from me, Siddharth Bhatia, and the Wire Talks podcast team.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys. Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Shunya 1, Shiladitya and myself are joined by Ashish Dave, CEO of Mirai Asset Adventure Investments. We talk about their current investment bets and how COVID has affected the funding process. On Getting Meta, marketing professional Lavanya Mohan shares with Chuck how content is always determined by the audience. On Candid Kanan, Kunal Kapoor, Dino Moria, and Drashti Dami join Siddharth to talk about their latest release, The Empire. Learn how to be a business champ on The Habit Coaches. Ashton talks to Malay Damania, business coach and author of Business Champ. And on Tere Mere Raste, Keshav recounts the night he first visited Kashmir under the black cloud of terrorism. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week on the network, Ciet Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.